I had given up my whole athletic career because of OCD. At that time, I mean, I was in a documentary about living with OCD as a college student, was working with the men's basketball team as a student assistant. I was working with adults that I thought I could trust. They ended up, from day one bullying me about my OCD. Of, the behind the scenes of me being abused verbally, my phone's buzzing and it's news outlets like USA Today, Sports Illustrated, ESPN.
Welcome to Please Excuse My OCD. My name is Tyler, and I'm here with my friend Tom Smalley, who has an incredible story. I heard him speak at the IOCDF conference, and I'm super excited to have him here. He has the Struggle into Strength company that he started, which helps athletes and high performers achieve the things that they need to achieve with the greatest mental capacity they can at the highest peak performance that they can. And he has ADHD and OCD. And I'm just really curious to hear his story a little bit more in depth and to have him share as much as he can about his journey. So, Tom, thanks so much for being here, man.
Dude, this is awesome. I'm pumped to be here. I was super excited that you reached out. And obviously I appreciate you coming to that session.
Of
Because
course.
I was on a Sunday morning too. I had a flight like that was the
You had to
first time.
leave.
I shit you not. That was the first time in probably I've been speaking at the IOCDF conference for 9 years now, and that was my 10th conference attending. And that might have been this only the second year that I've ever spoke on a Sunday morning. So when I booked my flight, I really love to stay till Monday morning just so I can decompress after like the conference, because I'm just once I'm boots on the ground, like
Yep.
it's go time and I'm just all over the place, doing stuff for the IOCDF, and then just a lot of meet and greet people, connecting with
Yep.
people. And so I try to stay till Monday, but this year I couldn't because I had something on that Monday morning that I had to be at. And so I booked my flight for Sunday and I get the schedule and it's like 9:45 to 11:30 is my last talk of the weekend, and my flight is at 1:30.
Yeah,
I was
literally was like, wow, he's literally by the skin of his balls. He's fucking just
literally, bro.
ripping.
Bro, I had my suitcase like behind the stage, and I was like, "Hey, Sydney has my information. If anybody has questions, email me, and
Yeah.
I'll see y'all later. It was great talking."
Yeah, that was really impressive. I was just, like, blown away because you did the speech, you left, and I was like, "That's how you do it." So I followed you right away, and, really, I mean, just connected to your story, I mean, with ADHD, OCD, the fact that you've been doing this for, like you said, 10 years, 10 conferences,
Dude, it's so
um,
crazy. That was
that's so wild.
such a kind of like a full circle moment this year. It's so funny because every conference that I speak at, especially like the every IOCDF conference I speak at, I'm like, they're so tremendous in so many different specific ways each year. And each year I I go in with the expectation that it won't be better than the last one. And
Yeah.
somehow it just blows me away in different capacities, and in the way the community shows up for each other and the people I meet. Um, it's just never not special.
Yeah. Well, I can't really I can't come at it from a perspective that's, seen multiple because this was my first. So to hear you say that excites me because in
Right.
my head, I'm like this like that was one of the coolest experiences of my life, and I've never felt that really that understood. So to hear you talk like that excites me about next year, and it sounds like you found your community. It sounds like you found like your place in what you're doing. And to hear you speak confidently, to be talking about your story, because I know how hard it is to grow up with ADHD, diagnosed or not. I know how hard it is to have these things that you're trying to like figure out how to balance it. To see you, you know, be on that stage and connecting and sharing your story. What like how did you get to that point? Especially like you said 10 years ago you started. Like walk me through, the beginning of your story and really how you ended up there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's crazy because I wasn't, I said this in the panel. I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until college.
Mm.
like later in college too, which is like I think really like people need to and the education system, needs help with that too, is diagnosing and um I think OCD masks a lot of those symptoms and can be um a lot of the symptoms can be put on OCD instead of calling it ADHD, and then you lose the separation of the two.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so I started, I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 16 years old. Yeah, and I was a freshman in high school. I mean, I was just in a really really bad place. I had suffered from chronic depression as a kid, and which sounds crazy. You're like a kid, you were depressed as a kid, but I really did. And my mom
Mhm.
definitely knew something was, I had some anxiety and I had a 504 plan in school. So like, I was teachers were watching me and making sure that, I was was doing okay. But really I think what happened was, OCD can it's very prevalent to really come on later in the teenage years, and or middle teenage years. And so, you transition from high school. I had transferred to the other public high school across town for a
Mhm.
fresh start. So I was nervous, and I think that just triggered so many of the symptoms, and then it just really brought my OCD out. I think I always had it, but it just was like it took that to really push it. And it got so bad where I was walking around certain tiles in the house. It was got to the point where I was hiding it for a year, and then finally it got so bad that like my dad is helping me out of the car. My parents are pushing me out of the house. Everybody's you know trying to bend their whole schedules around getting me to where I need to be because I literally can't function.
Right.
Um, and then, I went to a few therapists, and, they say they treat OCD, and then it's it's talk therapy, and I'm leaving there still counting my steps and not knowing how to combat those thoughts and not give into the compulsions.
Mhm.
And it got so bad to the point where, I it's so tough to say now looking back, now it's been close to 11 years, which is like
Wow.
baffling to me to think about, that I've been advocating for 9 or 10 years now. But um you got so bad to the point where I didn't see a life worth living.
Mm.
And I remember looking my mom in the eyes and saying like I don't want to live anymore. Um and I mean like, as a 15, 16-year old, you don't really think about what that means to a parent, right? And I think, hindsight now, being 26, it's like, man, like that must have been the toughest thing in the world to hear.
Of
And I
course.
think she just went into mom mode, and my dad was, went into dad mode. And I was very fortunate that I had a support system, right? Like they didn't know OCD, but they knew I needed desperate help immediately. Otherwise, it was going to be an emergency. Not everybody has that. Comes from a, a dual parent household,
Mhm.
and has a really supportive brother. My brother put a lot of his accolades and achievements off to the side and focused on making sure that I was okay and that I was taken care of. He didn't receive as much attention by my parents for a good portion of end of high school through his college years because they couldn't, they were so
Yeah.
worried about me and my suicidal ideation and relapse.
Mhm.
So my mom begged, a therapist to take me on that was highly recommended, and Amy had no spots for clients. She was totally booked out. And my mom, and this is what my mom had told me, is she left a voicemail crying, like pretty much begging Amy to take me on as a client or just see me and then refer me to somebody else. And Amy
Wow.
did. And instead of referring me, Amy kept me on as a client. Um,
Wow.
and Amy has been my therapist for 10 years now, which is
That is
like the
incredible.
wildest thing in the world. I call her Aunt Amy. I always give her a shout on every podcast I talk about my OCD on. Um,
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy, when you find that clinician that really just shows you what your life could be like without debilitating mental illness.
Yes.
And then so, fast forward through therapy. And I mean, it's hard to say fast forward through therapy because it was so anxiety provoking. And, people don't realize what ERP is. It's super um, exhausting
Mhm.
and it's scary. Right.
Yeah.
And so, I went to the first IOCDF, my first IOCDF national conference in LA in 2015. And I went with my dad, which was so fun. I hadn't really traveled that much up until that point,
Yep.
because of my OCD and just, I had been kind of locked in, right? And just
Sure.
kind of in a bubble. So I got to see LA and it was really cool. And then, literally on the last day, um, Chris Tronson, who I was mentioning before off camera, he was starting the young adult track. The young adult
Mhm.
track you see today. He's the one that created that. Um, and it was a panel, and he asked for the audience to give some testimonials. And I don't know why I felt compelled to go up there. It's probably because I had talked at an OCD Awareness a Week event like
Yep.
6 months prior, to like just sort of like families and like probably 25, 30 people, nothing crazy, but it was just
Mhm.
kind of like a support group talk. And I felt like, like I could do that. Like I felt recovery in sharing my story. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and I got up to that mic in front of probably like 100 people and just started telling about, what I was feeling and, my troubles with OCD. And then Chris, I leave, and Chris follows me down the hallway and he's like, "Hey, do you want to talk in the next conference?" And I was like, "Okay." 16-year-old me.
Yeah.
And then just like that, man, I've spoken at every conference since then.
Wow.
There was a situation, and I don't know if I shared this in the panel you attended because it wasn't really relevant to the topic that we were
Mhm.
talking about. But there was a situation in college. I had given up my whole athletic career. I played, football, basketball, lacrosse. I'd given all that up, because of OCD. And
Yeah.
I went into college. I got into one school, and um, I was working with the men's basketball team as a student assistant. And at that time, I mean, I was in a documentary about living with OCD as a college student. I was very, very front facing advocate.
Mhm.
Not quite as much as now, but like because I didn't have the platform that I had now. But
Sure.
it was definitely, you Google my name, it's
Yep.
going to be linked to the IOCDF, and there's going to be podcasts and articles I'd written,
Mhm.
and been on. So I was working with adults that, 40, 50 years old that I thought I could trust. And they ended up, from day one bullying me about my OCD. And,
Wow.
um, you know, would say things like, "You're going to be the next school shooter."
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
like, take your crazy pills, would just embarrass me in front of the team. And so,
Wow.
you know, with that, the first year of it, I brushed it off because I was like, it's Division 1 basketball. Like, it is what it is. I gotta have a tough skin. And then it got worse, and then it got worse, and then I was like, "No," like, I remember vividly, I was at the national conference, and I was at a
Mhm.
table with Chris Johnson and a few of our other, lead advocate friends, and I was like, tell they were like, "So how's, work with the basketball team?" And, because the team I was working with was a very high profile mid-major team, and I was like,
Mhm.
well, it's the guys are really cool and the team's really cool, but the coaches that I work with like say some stuff that bothers me. And I shared the things that they said, and they all looked at me like they had seen a ghost. And that's when I kind of realized, like, oh wow, like what they're saying is not okay. Fast forward of the behind the scenes of me being abused, verbally, gets out to the media. And I'm in my 6 to 9 p.m. class, and my phone's buzzing, and it's news outlets like USA Today,
Oh my
Sports
god.
Illustrated, ESPN, Albany Times Union, like all these news outlets, CBS. Um,
Wow.
and so, I look at the headline and it's head coach under investigation for verbal abuse towards student manager
Oh my
with
gosh.
OCD. So, listen,
Wow.
my name wasn't in it, but
Right.
do the math. There's two student assistants. One I live with to this day. He's one of my best friends from college, and one of us has OCD and is a public advocate. So it's like,
Jeez.
uh, you know, how hard is it to identify that? So
Yeah.
people found out it was me. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
That
yeah.
must have been
So
hard to even deal with, especially, like, as somebody who's in treatment trying to, you
right,
know, get to a place where they're not feeling, trapped 24/7, and also,
right.
advocating. That must have been, like, really hard.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, it was like, at that point you have a choice. I always say it's like, you can be what that coach labeled you as.
Mhm,
Because what I've found is when I advocate for OCD, if I do it in a way that's abrasive and emotional, people are way less likely to listen and take you seriously. Whether
mhm.
that's right or wrong, it's about how you deliver the message. And when you can lead with education and awareness and fact, it goes a lot better. And so, with the IOCDF's help, that's what I did. And I got my platform just expanded. You're in a national spotlight at 20 years old, and it's not something I expected, but it expanded. And then that's when I got, amongst that time of me um, being bullied, I relapsed. Obviously,
Of
it was
course.
tough. I had gone into college thinking I was going to reinvent myself, and then you take three steps back. But I will say that situation, I still wouldn't change. I
Mhm.
still wouldn't, um, you know, I would still go through that today, which sounds
Yep.
absolutely crazy to people, but like that suffering taught me so much about myself and so much about who I want to be and what I bring to the table and what I can
Mhm.
do for others. And it gave me my North Star of serving others. Right. So like within suffering, you find so much purpose.
Yes.
And so, you know, when I was being, when I was working with the team and that situation was going on, I was bonding with the head performance coach at the school, and he would take me under his wing and I would train with him and learn from him. And that's kind of how I got into the position my career path, and so
Wow.
I went into performance and ended up, I was a psychology major and um, you know, ended up taking like 7 classes one semester in my senior year to get to grad school, and which I was not a student until probably junior, senior year of college. And, obviously we'll talk about that after is, part of
Sure.
that was the ADHD. But, I needed someone to tell me like that I am capable. And
Mhm.
that's what Ian did. And so, um, started interning with him, and then it just took off from there. And then went left the area that I was in, and after I graduated undergrad, and went to Massachusetts and did my master's in sports science, and now I worked in the college setting with performance, with strength and conditioning, and then um, have transitioned to mental performance now, and have kind of taken on um, kind of found my niche. I
Mhm.
always my mom's gonna watch this and be like, and text me and be like, "It's niche." Um, but
We don't
sorry, mom.
discriminate
But
here, man. We
yeah. I found that kind of now. I really feel like at 26, like, all right, now I planted so many seeds, and it's like these things start to come together, and it's like, okay, now I can kind of see why I went through what I went through.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm hearing, is just it seems like everything formed together where you are now the person you are through those experiences, able to help other people because let's be honest, a lot of this when it comes to other people it doesn't stop. There are going to be more people who show up and um, they don't know how to express themselves because something might be taboo and other people may not accept them. And so this whole cycle that exists out there and has existed needs people like you, needs people to show up and say, "Hey, I've been there. Like this is what happened to me, and this is how I, rose from it." Really. So it sounds like all of this, you know, puts you exactly where you are right now, which is exactly where you need to be. And not saying like I'm not telling you where you need to be, but I think as somebody who knows what it's like to struggle with these things and knows how important it is to share our experiences and to step into the world of other people who are growing up and are afraid. This is necessary.
100%.
So,
No, and I agree with you. I am right where I need to be, and I think it's super tough with OCD to be reminded of that sometimes. And um, I think this year I've done a better job of, it wasn't like that situation was the last piece of adversity I hit, right?
of course.
It was between the age of 23 and 26. I had my ADHD diagnosis. Was fighting the US doping agency on getting my meds for competition. Um, you know, I I went through a a separation that was really tough. And you lose a best friend.
Of course.
You find stuff out about yourself. I was in a bad car accident in February, and since February, um, I don't think I've seen ever any. I don't think I've seen any clearer than I do now of why I am where I am.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes it takes these, life sends you these alarms of like, hey, this isn't meant for you. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's going to force your hand. The world's going to force your hand of like, hey, this is where you're supposed to be. And the world puts you where you're supposed to be. I firmly believe that. But it's
Yes.
super tough to, you know, I still every day am just trying to remind myself to be where my feet are.
Yes. That is so valid. That and I'm relating to you as you're speaking because in my own life I'm going through some things right now personally, and you hit the nail on the head almost like, when you're forced to show your hand, and
Mhm.
you're forced to move in a way that you can't go back. You can't
Mhm.
avoid like what's in front of you, where the universe or the world, whatever you want to call it, is saying, "Hey, this is where you are, this is where you need to be, and this is where we're going." And it's scary, especially like you said, somebody with OCD. I want to talk about too, like your travel too, because that's something that I can relate to as well, is the fear of just going anywhere outside of your comfort zone. And
100%.
that can relate to geographically, that can relate to just in general with your life. And for yourself, how have you found a way to kind of separate yourself from your comfort zone, if that's something that would say is accurate for yourself? Like, how have you found that place with everything you're doing?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's an ongoing thing, right? I mean,
Mhm.
um I love my routine. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I was candidly, I traveled more in July than I have traveled in probably a year or 2 years, maybe even
Wow.
3. I was going at conferences, speaking. I mean, 3 days of it was vacation on the Jersey Shore. So, I mean, like, and I was 4 or 5 different places in July. Like, it was
Wow.
crazy. And I am so routine oriented, and I know that about myself. I also know the other side of things of, hey, like, there's people that need me to serve them and to help them and to lead them where they don't know where they're supposed to go or look for. And I think, like, just knowing that there's hundreds of thousands of me, of who I was at 15 out there feeling lonely and feeling scared, it drives me to be out of my comfort zone and keep sharing and pushing myself to not let limits define me and not set limits on myself.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's just an ongoing battle of like understanding that that's where growth happens. I mean, there's things that, are constants for me when I travel. I think another thing is like, my friend always says it is um failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And you can get out of your routine to travel and go out of your comfort zone, but you can also bring things with you and have a routine within travel and set yourself up for success, or to eliminate certain things. So for me, like being a competitive weightlifter, I make sure I find, when I was at the conference, I was training at 6 a.m. All 3 days
Wow.
at this weightlifting club in Orlando that was about 20 minutes from the hotel.
Wow.
I just reached out to them. I was like, hey, I'm a competitive weightlifter. I need a club to train at. And weightlifting community is super close, and just like, I see these people at national competitions, and they're just great. And so, you make a lot of connections that way.
Mhm.
But that's like a non-negotiable for me. And
Yeah,
so it's like, just making sure things that, I know are going to alleviate some anxiety, not compulsions, but things that
sure.
I know are constants in my life that I value, and
Mhm.
just bring them with me, and then kind of let the rest go. Um,
I
because
love
it's not
that.
permanent. And then going out of the country, that's the different
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. Well, for anybody going out of the country, it could be exciting, it could be nerve-wracking, but I mean, somebody like yourself or myself who value routine, who value understanding themselves and where they are in their place, that is challenging. So I
Yeah,
definitely, don't blame you. I love though what you said about almost bringing a little bit of your comfort zone, your routine, a little bit of that with you so that you're
right,
not just completely naked.
right,
Um, and you don't lose track of what you're doing. So,
right. Yeah,
um, I just I commend you for getting involved as well at such a young age while understanding that you are in therapy for this, that you are
yeah,
healing. It's going to be an ongoing process.
yeah.
Like I just
No, I
turned 30
appreciate
in
that.
March. Yeah, man, like I and I'm just now learning about what the IOCDF does. I'm learning about these different things with people, and I've tried ERP on my own and was just I never recommend that with for anybody. And I'm just it's basically just torture. But
Yeah.
I am just now, getting involved in professional
I'm
ERP.
glad I'm
So
glad you found that, man. I'm super glad you found that. I'm super thankful you found that. I mean,
thank you.
that's the mission at the IOCDF is, our core mission is to get people diagnosed earlier, get people affordable and accessible treatment, and to provide that hope, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've seen a lot, and, I was guilty of it early on in my, diagnosis, where I was really at rock bottom of saying, like, well, this is how life is going to be. Like, it's just going to be a daily struggle every day. And that's not the messaging we want to give off. I want to, when I speak, I want people to know, like, hey, there's a whole world out there that's worth living, and you don't have to just survive. Like,
Yes.
you can thrive and really, reach what you want to reach, and go after what you want to go after, because OCD shouldn't stop you. Is it going to be tough some days? Yeah, absolutely. I have some really bad days. Last Wednesday, I was just like, just having one of those days of my OCD where it was just super tough. But then you rely on those disciplines and those principles that you've learned,
Yeah.
in therapy, and sometimes it gets you through, and most of the time it does, and sometimes it's harder than others. But that doesn't mean there's not hope, and that there's not a whole world that's worth living, and a whole life that's worth
Yes.
living. And I think that's just kind of like, every time I talk now is like, hey man, I want people to know, like, yeah, it's a struggle sometimes, and you're gonna face challenges, and like, life is not without suffering, right? Like, everybody
100%.
suffers to some degree,
Yep.
and my suffering isn't worse than your suffering, and your suffering isn't worse than my suffering. Suffering is suffering, right?
Yes.
And but that doesn't mean there's no hope in that suffering, and that then you can't overcome that. And I think that's kind of, a portion of when I talk, I want people to understand.
100%. And I totally agree with you. I think we can get fixed on or fixated on our problems and feel uh not I guess hopeless would be a word, but also out of control. Like we don't have control on our within ourselves in our lives, and I think that's when things can feel 10 times worse. And so
100%.
when you're talking to like athletes, like with your the LLC struggle into strength, when you started that company, helping them mentally, did you expect that to be the ultimate goal, or
No.
did you kind of stumble into that?
I kind of stumbled into it, and I mean, I always have gravitated towards that side. A lot of the talks I give is mental health and athletes, but um, I was still a strength coach. I still,
Mm,
I had always emphasized mental performance and mental health in my athletes that I worked with. So I was pretty well versed in talking about it from just based off my own experience. But um, that was kind of what I gravitated towards too. But I was it's funny actually. I was in a situation. I was working at a school, and it was an interim position, and I thought I was going to get promoted. And before I got promoted, I went on a podcast and talked about my mental health,
mhm.
and it was public. And then the athletic director, the AD, came to my office that day before I was setting up for football's training session and said like, "We need you to take that down. Like, we can't have our athletes seeing like your mental health journey, and like we don't want you need to tell us
Wow.
before you're going to do that stuff." And bro, I shit you not, I handed in my resignation that day.
Wow.
And a lot of my supervisors were, past supervisors and mentors were like, "Dude, that's like, you know not a good
Wow.
idea. Like, just stick it out." And I was like, "No, like I don't want to be anywhere that doesn't accept me for me." And the athletes were devastated to see me go. You know how many messages I got after that? Like, "Where are you going?"
Wow.
It was
Yeah.
devastating. And I couldn't tell them why I was leaving. I was,
Wow.
and like for 2 years I had to just like kind of like be like, "Oh, I left because, I was contracting," like, and
Wow.
and then finally, I went from there to another school, and then
Mhm.
I came back to the Albany area, the capital region, which I love it here. I'm from Connecticut originally, but obviously did my undergrad in this area, left for a little while, and then ended up coming back to this area. It just felt like home. A lot of my connections and people are here now.
Yeah.
Um, but I became director of performance for a training facility, and that's when I built Struggle and Strength. And really, all it was at first was just online programming and like strength and conditioning for athletes, and some consulting, and then just mental health advocacy. And
Wow.
then as I got further and further into my role in that facility, I could see myself that I was time to go on my own, and I ended up going back to school and for more sports psych education, for real mental performance education. And so, because, I'm big on, lived experience is great,
Mhm.
but you can't give people expert advice just off of lived experience. And
Mhm.
I have a really deep appreciation for doing things the right way, and putting in the time and education and experience. So I went through a really, really, um, thorough 500-hour mentorship.
Wow.
And, so it's, through the Applied Association of Applied Sports Psych. And so that's when I realized, like, oh, like, this is what my LLC is about, like mental fitness and mental performance. Like, this is the side that I love. And that really has happened the past year. Is really when I
Wow.
realized, like, this is what it is. And like, I think this is my niche.
Yes. Mom's gonna be happy about that.
Yeah.
That's, I think that's incredible, man. I mean, I'm inspired just listening to your story and you talking about it seems like a lot of it you stumbled into. Like, you talk about, your athletic career, right? And putting that aside and having to really dig your toes deep into your own healing, and it just I get goosebumps thinking about it because, like, I believe in energy. I believe in just things working the way they do.
100%.
And to hear your story, it's just incredible. And I saw on your website too that struggle into strength, that's a saying that you and your mom have
Yeah, yeah.
always had.
Honestly, my mom should get 30% of everything I make, honestly, because between, the therapy that my parents paid for and then,
Yeah.
her actually kind of creating that mantra, it's just something she just always said to me, "You're gonna turn your struggle into strength. The struggle is gonna be strength." And she
Oh,
reminded me of that, and my parents sacrificed so much, man. I mean, like, she sacrificed friendships, she sacrificed work, her career, she sacrificed, so much. My dad worked way more hours than he needed
wow.
to be able to afford stuff. So I think, like, you know, you don't notice those things when you're in the throat of it
Of course.
and of the OCD and you're a teenager. But now I'll always be indebted to them. I'll always feel like I'm indebted for them. And, everybody's like it's their job, but like, bro, like I know so many parents that wouldn't do that shit for their kid.
Yeah. There's a
Um,
huge lesson there
yeah,
for parents, because I think a lot of parents may hear something like this, and they may be in a place where they're scared and they don't understand. I mean, and my parents, I'm listening to you speak and I'm thinking about my parents, because they probably were cut from the same cloth, and they didn't know what OCD was. They didn't know about, how ADHD worked, and they still, did their best to make sure that we could, get diagnosed, to make sure we could understand what's going on, and to the best of their ability. And when you have a support system like that, it makes a world of difference. And for somebody who's listening to this, who may not have a support system, what would you say to them in terms of, like, if they're in the thick of it, like, what would you say to them to help change their perspective or change the direction that they're going?
yeah. Oh my god, a few things, but I mean, I think if one thing I would say is that it's about quality, not quantity, right? Like, look around you. One thing I thought about, the other day was like everybody checks in on you after something happens, right? But who
Yep.
checks in on you a month after? Who checks in on you 2 months after? 3 months after? Like, those are the people you want around you.
I love
And,
that.
just keep an eye on those people and be more aware of that, and find those people and stay and keep them close. And then the other thing, that really shifted my 2 things actually that shifted my perspectives. Callie Warner, a good friend of mine, IOCDF advocate, she, it was actually last conference. She said, "You don't have to be fully healed to help others heal." And when I was given the Hero Award in 2019 by the IOCDF, I felt like I needed to be the poster boy for recovery and, hope. And I felt like, who am I to help other people in their recovery when I'm not even recovered? And the reality is, like, you don't need to be fully recovered to help others recover and help others heal, right? Like, we're all healing. Come as you are, right? That's
Yes.
something, my church always says, right? Like,
Mhm.
come as you are. Like, who are you right now? That's okay. Like,
Wow.
you're enough. And so, that really shifted my perspective and made me feel better about, the pressure of like people that listen to my story don't want to hear me be perfect. They want to hear that I still have bad days and that I'm authentically me. And that's what
Of
I
course.
realized after Callie said that. And the third thing that I would say is I think in February this year, I really the car accident, like I said earlier, like, like, sometimes life just, if you push away the alarms, it just sends you one big alarm that you can't push away. And after that accident, I really realized that life happens for you, not to you. And the
Yes.
more you can see that and be in that mindset, the less cynical I am. The less walls I put up, and I realize that, and the more accepting of situations I am. And I think that mindset shift, while it's not every day that I feel like that, right?
Of
It's
course.
just a good reminder. Life is happening for you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's beautifully put, and your authenticity is something that it's no surprise that you've been involved for this long and that you're able to have this effect on people in that way because I really don't think that anything that's inauthentic gets that far anyway. So like I mean that's beautifully put, and I think you're right when it comes to life sending you alarms. It's eventually you have to wake up and turn that thing off yourself, you know what I mean?
100%.
So,
Absolutely.
when you talked about the car accident, you said this was in this February
Yeah,
2024.
2024. I've had a pretty crazy 2024, honestly.
That's wild. So, did you end up in the hospital? Like, what happened?
Yeah, yeah. Without going into too much detail,
Sure.
I hit a patch of black ice and had to turn into the wall to avoid hitting a car that was
Oof.
stalled in the road. And went 45, 50 miles per hour into a cement wall.
Oh my
Went
gosh.
to the hospital, and that really um just woke me up and just kind of realized that like I was about to move somewhere that where I that wasn't meant for me.
Mhm,
And I was a part of a weightlifting team here that
mhm.
I love and the community that I love. My weightlifting career was going really well. My business was growing in this area. And I really think the world was like, hey, you need to be in the capital region of Albany and like this place is like family and home and you need to stay here. Like whether it be forever or just for right now, you like this is where you're supposed to be. And I think that really
Yeah.
just woke me up. But it's crazy because I was actually competing 2 weeks later in Ohio, and during the that month, I was battling the U.S. doping agency about getting my therapeutic use exemption for Adderall,
Oh my
because
gosh.
in American Open finals in the December before that February, I had to compete without my Adderall. And
Wow.
it made a
That must have been
huge
hard.
difference, because it's technically a banned substance. Um, and so they pretty much were like, "You can't take it." And so obviously I'm a rule follower, so I lifted without it. And that was the first time I hadn't taken Adderall like regularly in like probably like 3 years. It was like I felt like I was a zombie. It was the craziest thing in the world, and I felt like my sensory overload was nuts.
Mhm.
My ability to concentrate and focus was like just non-existent. It was crazy, dude. Um, and so I had to like go through a lengthy process between December and February of like being kind of like I've done before, advocating for change in that process because the US doping agency, while they do a lot of good things to keep the sport clean, when someone applies for a therapeutic use exemption, a TUE,
Mhm.
there's a human being attached to that application, and that human being needs their medication to function,
Yep.
and so I was trying to get a hold of anybody that I could, and luckily someone connected me with somebody else, and if they hadn't, I don't know if I would have got that TUE. But so that's something I really advocate for now is like we need to make sure we humanize that process of applying for a therapeutic use exemption, and just understanding that like, okay, so you're telling me I can't have my medication because that'll put me at an advantage. But you're but you're telling me if I to not take it, so now I'm gonna be at a disadvantage? Like,
Right, right.
what kind of fucking sense does that make?
That's exactly what I was
Um,
thinking. I was like, "You're not, like, at baseline." Like, if everyone
right,
else is at baseline, you're not at baseline.
right, and so, that's when, like, ADHD I mean, really, I started I got diagnosed, when I was in college, and I took Focalin at
Mhm.
first, and that, like, ramped up my OCD symptoms big time. A lot of it was like trying to find that balance of, what medication is going to go well with my Prozac,
Mhm.
that's not going to exasperate my OCD symptoms and make my anxiety worse.
Yep.
And the worst part is it's trial and error. Luckily, with stimulants for ADHD, it's instant, right? Like when I had
Yeah.
to like work through getting my medication for SSRIs, it was like, all right, we'll see you in 4 weeks and see if you
Yeah.
feel good. And then we'll have to
Yes.
change it if you feel suicidal. And it's like, what?
Yeah, it's scary, man.
It's
I
very
know.
scary. It's
I know,
very
and they're
scary.
like, "Yeah, just hang in there," and you're like, I remember being at the psychiatrist, and he said the exact same thing, and I literally thought to myself, like, "What if I'm not here by then?"
Right.
Like,
Like,
it's
oh, so you're just
terrifying.
banking on me, like, being totally okay, like, in
Yeah,
4 weeks? Like, yeah,
it's
crazy.
wild.
It's just a crazy system, and I know, there's not really much they can do for it, but it's
Yeah.
definitely, the combination of the OCD and the ADHD just, like, it's tricky. It's
Yeah.
super tricky, and, a lot of it I think a lot of the A I think OCD affected my daily life.
Mhm.
ADHD really affected me as a student.
Yep.
And I think that really crushed me, in high school, not knowing I had ADHD,
Mhm.
and then in college, up until that point, I was advocating for my OCD, but I wasn't advocating for my ADHD, and I think there's just a big difference.
Yes, of course. And when with, being in high school, the education system we know, um, is a whole different animal when it comes to, helping people like us, in that regard. But now that you are, you're out of college, you're in the world doing really incredible things, um, and advocating about these things, I really do feel that there's a shift in the way kids are viewing themselves in high school right now, in middle school. Because they're seeing that, especially with the internet, they're seeing that most of these like business owners, most of these people who have been through the system and the system did not work for them, they had to create their own way
Mhm.
around the system. And,
Totally.
I know that for myself, I know that for my brother who has extreme ADHD. We had to create our own systems because the system didn't listen to us.
Mhm.
And I think that's the work about talking about ADHD, and the fact that you even said too, like, you didn't really feel like a student until, like, junior, senior year of college, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
having that realization for you and while advocating, like, can you tell me a little bit about that, about becoming like a student and really finding that extra thing that you needed?
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like your parents sorry, but before I answer,
Sure.
do you feel like your parents advocated for your own system
100%.
to try to,
Yeah.
you know, find yourself in school?
In the beginning, my parents didn't understand ADHD. They were still trying to figure out what the hell was wrong with my OCD part.
Yep.
But once I got to senior year of high school, and that was the transition to college, that was before things got really bad for me.
Mhm.
But my parents always encouraged me to, because I was big into the music, and they were like, lean into the music. Like, um, they still pushed for college because I think at that time it was like, you got to get good SATs and you got to go to
Yep.
college to get a good, right. They still pushed for that. And now we have nobody in trade. So, but I was very fortunate that like my parents also pushed for like self love, self fulfillment. Like they also
That's
pushed that
amazing.
side. So I was
Yeah.
lucky to have that. I know a lot of parents in our generation, like they were like just so college focused that they were just like this, this, this,
100%.
this. You know what
I
I
was gonna
mean?
say, I mean, so I was born and raised in Fairfield County, and,
Hmm.
um, my parents switched their tune for sure,
Yeah.
about, uh, needing to go to college, but the expectation in Fairfield County was graduate top 10% of your class and go to a 4-year university, and then go on to be somebody in finance in the city, or
Yep.
go be a lawyer or a doctor. And that was kind of that.
Yep.
Go work in management, go work in something along those lines, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I was just not cut from that mold, and was just so radically different than.
Yeah.
And I think it almost gave my parents a little. I mean, they were like, "Oh gosh," but then, like, because they don't think at first
Yeah.
that I, knew where I was headed, and for a while I didn't, but I think they appreciated my creativity and my ambition to do something a little bit more meaningful and different. Um,
Yes.
and I think that definitely helped push me in. believing I could do something like that.
That can make the world of difference, man, and I don't necessarily blame, our parents because, like, that time, that's what it was. It was like you need because
Right,
they saw their parents being like, "You gotta go to school," because my grandparents, like, didn't go to school. Like, my mom's parents came from the old country in Portugal and, like, left school in 4th grade to help work the farm. My
right,
dad's parents, like, didn't go to my dad's father left in high school. So it's like they were, like, very adamant about school to my parents, and then my parents were like, "Hey, school," and then we get out of school and we're like, "What the fuck? Nothing works."
yeah,
So, you know,
literally,
but,
yeah,
to go back to that point about, finding your own path and really, embracing your the superpower, because it really can be, especially with ADHD, is, the way our brains work are just, it's different. It's not
100%.
conventional. It doesn't mean that we're weak, or it doesn't mean that we can't function. We just function differently.
Right,
And,
right,
mix that with OCD, it is a cocktail for sure. I have quite a few friends with both, and they were misdiagnosed through the
yeah,
years.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so
But I mean, going back to that question you had asked about becoming a
yeah.
student, I mean, I think, um, you know, I'll be honest, I'll give a tremendous amount of credit to my ex-girlfriend,
Mhm,
who I hope is doing well to this day. You know, she was a phenomenal student and really pushed me to believing that I could be that level of a student, to
mhm.
believe that I could go to grad school and do those types of things. When a lot of clinicians told me I wouldn't make it past high school or undergrad, right? Um, so I think meeting her my junior year definitely turned the tides on me as a student. But I also was coming into my own more and enjoying what I was learning more, and I think that obviously helps as well. But
Absolutely.
then the other side was, it was tough because I came from a public school and I had an IEP and like a 504 plan,
Mhm.
but I went to a private college, and when I got there, they can decide what accommodations they give you from your high school plans and what they don't, because they're not a state school. They're not like mandated by law. So
Gotcha.
I was like fighting for my life to get certain accommodations that I just could never got. So it was like, at what point do you advocate and then like pull back the reins and be like, all right, how, this is the situation, like I'm dealt kind of a shitty card, but like it's how we play the hand. And so just kind of
Mhm.
studying about how to study, right? Like
Yeah.
work, like reading about how, what skills and guidelines to use of how to be a student, um using the resources at the college, like the writing center and tutoring, whether I felt like embarrassed, to be going to tutoring 4 times a week, or going to, the office of accessibility,
Mhm.
or disability and accessibility. Like, people saw me doing that stuff, but at that time, I think I was so, in high school, it was a little bit more, I was a little more self-conscious about it because I'd get like taken out of the classroom during a test or whatnot and have to
Mhm.
explain it. At 21, 22, I was like, dude, I need every resource that I need, and that's just how it is. And
Yep.
because I want to be on a level playing field.
Yep.
And that just goes back to like self love and self worth. For a while, I thought I didn't deserve those resources, and I thought it was unfair that I was getting those. And that was probably an OCD thought, right? Like a
Sure.
lot of that
Yeah.
is like that moral scrupulosity that I have of
Yep.
like, something good happens, I think the world's going to punish me in return.
Yep.
Thinking that my suffering isn't bad and I need to get over it. Like, like stuff like that, and not feeling
Yep.
those emotions. And I think for a while I struggled with the fact that I felt like, why do I deserve these resources and other people don't? And that like I should just kind of get over it. And then I realized like, no, this is how my brain works.
Yeah. That radical acceptance
Mhm.
and of yourself, or at least this version of yourself, and that's hard. That's hard to do. Like, I had that thought this morning where I was like, I saw somebody on my drive this morning, and you know, he was struggling, and I was thinking to myself, like, what the fuck do I have to be upset about. And I was like, no, like you're don't gaslight yourself, dude.
Right.
Like that acceptance, that like condition, that unconditional love towards yourself is something that we also have to relearn. Like that's hard to
100%.
do, in a world like today, but it's not impossible. And I think
Yeah,
that's important to drive home. I think that's important. And it seems like in the
definitely.
work that you're doing, you're you like you can't do that work without self-compassion. You can't do that work
100%.
without teaching people that. And so doesn't mean you're going to be perfect every day, like you said earlier,
No.
right? You're not going to wake up every day and be like, I love myself. It's just, it's a practice throughout your life,
Yeah.
with
I mean, I think it's
OCD.
also like self-love doesn't mean like you said, like waking up and being like, "Oh, I'm great. I'm awesome."
Yeah.
Affirmations, like great. It's accepting your flaws too
Yep.
and actively working on them, right? And being aware.
Mhm.
It's self-awareness. Like self-awareness is I think that's been like kind of my MO of 2024 is being self-aware of like this is what, you know, I like about myself and this is what, I'm actively working on and just being self-aware and accepting those flaws too.
100%. Could not have said that better.
I think
I
like
th
I love the topic of self-development
Yeah.
because I think people think that like after 22 you just kind of like go on autopilot and I've seen 60-year-olds that develop in a year more than a 30-year-old, right? Like it's really about what you're actively doing to and your want to in the pursuit of something.
Yeah, 100%. It's self-betterment, and I think a lot
Yeah.
of that, like, that comes from, like you said earlier, the alarms too, that just keep ringing. I don't know if you've ever read The Power of Now. You probably definitely
Yes.
heard of it, right? I read it a
Yep.
few times, and, it actually onset my existential OCD at the age of 26, but
Great
that
book
was one
though.
of the great book, yeah, highly recommend. Great exposure. But I truly, but like I love the book, and I'm so thankful for that crisis because I think so differently now than I did before that, and in a good way, in a more expanded way, more loving way. And but the point is, reading that throughout different stages of my life, I got it's like I was reading 3 different books. I was in totally different places reading that book multiple
Yep.
times. And the same can happen in your life as a 30-year-old, as a 60-year-old. The way you think radically changes your environment, radically changes the way you approach life. And
Definitely. And your
that's going to
environment can
change.
change the way you think too.
100%. Absolutely. But it's so important to keep that in mind, in the fact that, like, you're never truly stuck. You like you
No.
true like truly like you do have the power to change things. It may take time, it may be really fucking hard, but you do have the power to change your life. And I think that's something that we need to continue to teach people, including
Yeah,
ourselves. I
definitely.
sometimes feel stuck, and I have to do extra to get myself to a place that makes a move.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally.
So
I always reference this there's this speech, I think it was is Emmy for TV?
yes, yes.
Okay, yeah. So I think it was Matthew McConaughey's either Emmy or Golden Globe,
Mhm.
and it was about who his hero is, and he
I
says
love
his
that.
hero is himself 10 years from now, and
Yep.
that like I watched that when I was like in college, and that like totally flipped me upside down. I was like, man, like what am I chasing? I'm never gonna be my hero,
Yeah,
but that keeps me chasing something.
yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
I know, I
it's
love that, love that.
Yeah, it's
It's
such a good speech, and his voice is just fucking iconic too, so it's just 10 times better because it's him.
Yeah, no, it's so true. But I that speech is one that so funny you brought him up, because I listen to that speech when I'm really, really going
Mhm.
through it. And it has such a quality to it that hits you. And it's true. I mean, it's also humility. It's realizing that you're never just gonna arrive at this like utopia of who you are. It's just you are who you are, and you're gonna
Right,
continue to change and evolve.
right. I
So,
think people get a have a lot of trouble with they set a goal and they don't reach it right away, and or within the time frame that they set that goal for. And the reality is, like, a lot of those goals can still be reached. It's just not necessarily, it might not happen in the time frame that you wanted it to happen.
Right.
And a lot of times, when you plant the seeds is not when you eat the fruit, right? And I think people have a misguided judgment on, like, oh, like, if I put in the work, I'm gonna, today I'm gonna eat tomorrow, and it's like, bro, you might not eat for 3 fucking years
Yeah.
with that work you're
Yeah.
putting in. I mean, and I've learned that through my sport of weightlifting. Like, I got my athletic career back 3 years ago. And for a year, I was putting in this work and I was like, man, I'm seeing such diminishing returns. And then it sparked me and I was like, oh, like, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And you just have to keep kind of stacking the days. And like, but that's when people quit, right? People quit
Yeah.
when you don't. I think we obviously live in a world where instant gratification is such a prominent um, thing in our lives. So I think the minute you start not seeing a return that gives you that serotonin boost, it's like, "Oh, never
Yes.
mind, I'm done."
Yep. You're right, and a lot of people struggle with that, including myself. I've been in those shoes, many
Mhm.
times as a musician.
Absolutely.
And with your competitive, weightlifting too. Um, you said that you put your athletic career to the side for a while, and then you got it back, and then you started competing. Um, did you before getting back into it? Was there any amount of fear in there that you have been out for a while, or did any of that, play around?
I had been training and I had been strong, so it was like physically, no.
Mhm.
I think I'm somebody that does well with their back against the wall. Well, I think that's, sometimes when I'm at my best, um, and I kind of like that environment. But
Mhm.
I think it just meant it was so meaningful to me that all that fear that I felt like to perform like just kind of went away because it was like, this is just so meaningful that I'm getting this opportunity. I hadn't competed in anything in 7 years, 8 years when my coach found me
Wow.
from a documentary I was in, and um, I didn't know jack shit about the sport. I didn't know I could take it this far, and then you get these opportunities and it's like, it's just surreal. Like, and
Yeah,
it is like has revived kind of this pursuit of mastery in me that I love so much.
that's incredible, man. It's a success story in itself, through all the trials and tribulations that you've been through, and the way people have tried to, hit you in the shins and continue to
Right.
get back up, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
um,
definitely.
this is an incredible conversation, man. I really just
Likewise.
appreciate really thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your story, the advocacy work you're doing. Um,
Absolutely.
and
Thank you for
and
having me.
and of course, man. Well, I wanna ask, where can people find you, in all forms?
Yeah, my website is struggleintostrength.com, and then my Instagram is at S number 2 S FOF. It actually stands for struggle and strength, faith over fear. If anybody's wondering.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah, yeah. People always wonder what it means, but um,
I was
it's
one
just
of those people.
kind of cryptic. But yeah, I actually recently I changed it to that, and it was kind of time for a little shift.
I love it, man. Well, once again, thank you so much for sharing your story, and, I'm sure so many people can get so much out of this, and just keep sharing the word, man.
Likewise, man.